Hello viewers, my name is Andrew Dean. I'm the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Lakehead University. And once again, welcome to Research Matters. So today we're going to meet an exemplary researcher, Dr. Robert Stewart. Rob is an Associate Professor in the Department of Geography at Lakehead University. His research interests are in water security and water resource management in the Lake Superior Basin. Dr. Stewart specializes in environmental monitoring and remediation techniques, and is currently applying community-based monitoring strategies to reduce vulnerability to water issues and protect watershed and coastal environments. Rob, welcome here.
Thanks, Andrew.
Would you perhaps just share the context of your research areas and your interests?
Yeah, well, as you had introduced, I think the key is water security, is what makes our water resources usable, safe, clean, particularly in a world where often water is a resource. And so a lot of the work I do relates to understanding physically, chemically, biologically the quality of water, but also the needs of communities of that water and how they can get involved in monitoring and protecting water resources in particular.
Okay. I mean, here in Thunder Bay, water's a huge thing. I mean, we view out on Lake Superior, it defines our existence here, geography here. Do you find that people sometimes have a different relationship with the water in the sense that maybe they don't quite see it as needing as much care and attention?
Well, certainly growing up here, I think you see the appreciation for water as a place to recreate, use, and so forth. But we use the myth of superabundance, the idea that all Canadians have an inflated idea of how much water we have. And why that's important is because when we start reaching tipping points, when we start using water to dilute our pollution, which is what we use water for, we need to know when that threshold is before that water becomes overwhelmed and polluted. And that's where our myth of superabundance influences us to perhaps not be as concerned about water resources as sometimes I am or sometimes scientists are when they study it.
Yeah. In science and research, we often use a lot of terminology, and when we talk about lake restoration, could you perhaps tell us, viewers, a little bit, what's the difference between restoration and remediation?
Well, I mean, a remediation is something often we use to counter the impacts on the environment. So we've created development, or we've caused an impact or used a resource, and we try to remediate some portion of that back. We try to replace or mitigate the impact so that we can show that we're balancing our development with protection. Restoration is valuing the services that nature provides us and trying to replace or protect those services. So if a river provides water not only for fish, but cools the surrounding environment and ultimately provides clean drinking water, then those services need to be protected or restored. So a restoration project really focuses on the valuable components of an ecosystem versus remediation, which sometimes is just replacing the land to look like it did beforehand. Remediation of tar sands or mining sites can simply just be replacing earth and trees versus really thinking through how the hydrology, the energy flows are functioning, and to make sure that those are replaced again.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I know you've had many research projects throughout your life, and they're always evolving and everything, but could you tell us something about your current research projects and maybe the funders as well?
Yeah, well, the current research started, I'd say, about 15 years ago with a social science and humanities research grant to really look at the issues in Lake Superior and how communities would adapt to future problems, climate change related problems. So sort of forecasting what the future could be, so that communities could better prepare themselves to protect the lake or manage the lake. And then that funding pool led to a number of federal and provincial funding opportunities with Environment Canada and the Ontario Ministry of the Environment to carry out remediation programs across the North Shore of Lake Superior. So the last 10 years we've been looking at legacy contaminants, so the contaminants that mills and mines leave behind that aren't really being addressed in the modern management regime, and we study those contaminants to make sure they're safe, or that if they need to be removed, how we would remove them. And then we work with communities and the government to figure out solutions of removing contaminants or restoring it, or sometimes leaving them alone, but knowing that we've understood them in place and we can leave them in place And so it's sort of a risk management type approach, but it uses science and community engagement to build consensus, because these problems are really complex and we can't solve them, we can only address them. And so that's what we try to do.
And you see how the problems are complex. I mean, sometimes we always want immediacy in science, but your work with the lake and Lake Superior in this area has been for many, many years. And it must have involved a number of report writing, and it must have, like data driven and just seeing what's changing over time. Is that really the case?
Yeah, and I think, so I'll give you an example. One of the major issues in Thunder Bay Harbor that we deal with is a large amount of mercury contamination left behind by a now bankrupt pulp mill. And that mercury, we can study it, we can understand it, but mercury is not something you can just pick up and move somewhere else. And if you do, the problem exists somewhere else. So a lot of the contaminant issues we deal with might not have a clear solution, but you still have to address the safety of it or the understanding of it, the diligence of it. And so a lot of the work sometimes feels like you're just going around in a circle, right? And you're looking for funding, looking for opportunities to address these issues. But it's really about engagement. It's really about people staying involved in recognizing that these sites exist, that we have inherited them, and that we're probably going to have to deal with them for generations, and that we shouldn't just close our eyes to them and forget about them like we perhaps might have done in the past decades. So to answer your question, it's a cycle of assessing, understanding, making decisions, and then reassessing again, that adaptive management type of approach to address problems that are really a lot more complex than we understand them to be.
So, our show's called Research Matters. I mean, I think even just in this little brief time, you've given me an indication, but in a few words, what would you say? Why does this research matter?
Well, I mean, the most important thing, I think, with our research is we really talk about how does the community have empowerment over the risks that are being managed around us. If we have risk in the environment, that community perspectives are critical to understanding that risk, not just science, not just government regulation. And so our research really tries to develop programming and opportunities that don't exist in the community to bring scientists, government, and community members together for that type of dialogue, an equity type of approach to dialogue where we all have knowledge in different forms and we're sharing it to deal with a problem that we all don't know the right answer to. So, I think it's our community impact that is the key.
And that community dialogue and that community engagement is really very much at the core of your research projects and how you move forward, is it?
Yeah, and it's not just a meeting. It is a relationship played out through meetings and through long-term commitment to being accessible and responsive to each other. So, it's very much a relationship, even though we do meet behind boardrooms and in certain working groups. But that's our focus, is to keep that trust and relationship with these programs and with what we're doing with contaminants in Lake Superior.
And the remedial action plans, I mean, I know that there are many, many areas of concerns throughout the Great Lakes. How many areas of concerns are there in Lake Superior?
Well, there's 4 areas. 3 of them are active areas of concern. One of them is in a state of recovery, which means there's no more actions to take. We're simply hoping and waiting that the actions of the past are creating recovery. There's 14 in Canada overall, and there's 40 around the Great Lakes. So essentially every major industrial city in the 1980s was designated an area of concern, and most of them are still working to deal with those legacy contaminants.
Great. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after to continue our discussions. Welcome back, viewers. So you're watching Research Matters, brought to you by Lakehead University. And in this segment, joining Dr. Rob Stewart and myself, we have Tim Hollinger. Tim is a graduate student in the Masters of Environmental Studies and Remedial Action Plan Coordinator for the North Shore Lake Remedial. So, Tim, really great to have you here. Nice to hear.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Maybe you could just share a bit of your academic background, your journey to how to get here, and in particular, your interests in this local region area.
Yeah, so I took geography in our department here at Lakehead University through my undergrad. And the great thing about geography is it allows you to explore a broad range of topics. And so I was drawn to studying river systems and lakes, how people interact with them. I was lucky enough to get a job out of first-year university doing research with the Ministry of Natural Resources, studying brook trouts and streams. And then that moved on to doing an undergrad thesis in studying dams across the north shore of Lake Superior Basin and their impacts on river systems. After that, I decided I wanted to do some graduate research, a master's degree, where we in our department had been working with Rocky Bay First Nation for a few years, and they had concerns over mercury levels in the fish associated with dams and hydroelectric development. So I started working with the community, with Rob, studying fish mercury contaminant levels across Lake Nipigon. Certainly some difficulties working in the pandemic, doing community-based research, but it really evolved into a very large project studying contaminant levels across the lake and within the river systems. And so what happens is when you develop a dam, you flood land, and that decomposition of organic matter tends to raise the levels of mercury within the aquatic system. And so in Rocky Bay, the community depends upon the lake, the watersheds for subsistence fishing. So it's important that we understand the levels of mercury within the fish.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that you started off in geography, like many students coming to university, maybe, studying something of interest, but then in your undergraduate, you got a bit of a taste of research.
Yeah.
And this then took you on and now into a master's and maybe a PhD going down the road. But did you find, when you first got into the research part, that became just something that really was exciting about your studies?
Yeah, for sure. I think certainly having the opportunity to work with the M&R and then pursue it, studying streams later on in undergrad, really, I didn't really even know what research was coming into university. But the ability to explore your curiosities, I think, of the environment. I'd grown up fishing trout and salmon on river systems on the north shore of Lake Superior. So to have the opportunity to work in those environments and to answer questions that I might have about the interactions within the environment. Definitely really drawn to research from early on in undergrad, and the opportunities within our department were, plentiful really to explore those questions that I had about dams on river systems and the species of fish that I really care about and are passionate about.
So it's Remedial Action Plan Coordinator. Tell us a little bit about your role. What do you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, so as a coordinator, we have 4 areas of concern, we call them, across the north shore of Lake Superior. So there's Thunder Bay, our harbor here. There's Jackfish Bay right next to Terrace Bay, Nipigon Bay, and Peninsula Harbor in Marathon. So my job is really to work with community partners across the north shore of Lake Superior to help understand the issues that we face in these areas of concern, and also come together to find solutions for our restoration practices and remediation in these areas of concern.
Is there a lot of, you say how you're working with community partners, and I was asked Rob this as well, is it a lot about just educating and making sure that people understand what is continually going on with the lake, or do you have the partners, they have a very good understanding of the issues themselves?
Yeah, so I would say the partners that we work with to implement remedial actions, as we call it, have a fairly good understanding. And also we have what we call public advisory committees, so representatives of the public who have an interest or stakeholders in these areas of concern. And so it's our job to work with the government, scientists, and ourselves who carry out studies in these areas of concern to communicate the science in a digestible and relevant manner for our community partners, for our public advisory committees, the general public. So really it's everybody, ranging from people who maybe are interested about the mercury in our harbor to those who are helping on the ground or the scientists that we're working with. So really a broad range of partners and knowledge levels, yeah.
You know, I was quite interested in when we were talking about damming and how the effects this have on decomposition and mercury, etc. I mean, you know, we often feel very lucky in Canada that so much of our energy and our is actually done through hydropower. But there are consequences for this, aren't there?
For sure, yeah. You know, we see a lot of flooding and alterations of our aquatic systems, and a lot of historical impacts too, which is one of our other research interests with Rocky Bay First Nation, is looking at that historical impact of, you know, the Agoki diversion of 1943, where communities really weren't, you know, engaged upon the development of the diversion, and it really impacted communities. A lot of communities on Lake Nipigon had to move and resettle their community due to flooding. So aside from just the environmental impacts, there's also the social impacts, and I think that's why it tends to be a very geographical issue, because we tend to look at, you know, how people interact with the environment and you know, our impacts on the environment.
Does this require you going back and looking at a bit of historical data, maybe even oral histories, and trying to figure out what the past was looking like? I mean, the geographers are quite excited about looking at old maps and etc. Is this part of the job as well?
Yeah, and maybe one of the most exciting parts about Lake Nipigon is that there's so little historical data. So what we've actually been working to do is collect sediment cores around the lake, which can reconstruct the lake's environmental history. So working with York University as well, we're looking at analyzing sediment cores in Lake Nipigon to get a greater understanding of the historical conditions and how those might have changed over time.
So just take us through like that scientific part of collecting a sediment core, and how far back can you actually understand what the lake looks like or did look like by doing that analysis?
Well, it depends on how deep you go into the lake sediment, that is, because as you go down where the sediment deposits, you're getting further and further into the lake's history record. So for our concerns, about 300 years, 100 to 300 years is what we're looking at, which is a finer scale on the grand scheme of things, but that's tends to be what we're interested in for the purposes of historical lake conditions in Lake Nipigon, yeah.
But when you think back 300 years, I mean, 300 years is quite a while ago in terms of
for sure.
our, you know, pre-contact and like that. You know, what was the lake like? You know, some of us only imagined it in some sense, but lakes do change, don't they?
Yeah, they change quite a bit. Again, the Agoki diversion altering and providing a lot of erosion into the lake at that point, right? When you go back 60 years and 300 years, it was very untouched, and there was communities living around the lake. But the impacts like the diversion are going to have, you know, big impacts on the lake condition, not just the people who live on it. Yeah.
Well, it's great. It's really great to hear your passion about this. And you know, it's clearly to me that there's passion about your research and your job as well. So, thank you, Tim. We're going to take a short break here and come back after this to continue our conversations with Rob and partners. Welcome back, viewers. So in this segment, we're going to be joined by Dave Godino, Manager of Business Development, Wilderness North Group of Companies, who is an industry partner of Rob's research team and engaged in the remedial action plan cleanup of waterfront legacy contaminants. Now, when I say waterfront legacy contaminants, a bit of viewers are wondering, Dave, what does that actually mean?
In our case, it means 100 years of pulp and paper development on the waterfront. We are neighboring the old provincial paper site, and it is part of the area of concern in the Thunder Bay North Harbour. And that's how we got involved with Rob, actually. It was through the Public Advisory Committee as a concerned community stakeholder and property owner affected by the cleanup that he got involved and met Alan Cheeseman, the owner.
So a lot of it really is about legacies. I mean, you know, companies that we had here, some we still have, you know, things that are just running into the lakes, and, you know, what was the effects of that and how we continue to monitor is it?
Yeah, so the effect is quite apparent actually with springtime currently around. We see a lot of water runoff, surface runoff coming across our property as a neighbor. So we are, we, that's how, again, how we got involved. That we saw the impact it was having just on us. And we thought, well, there must be a greater impact on the lake itself and other neighbors as well. So
Good. So, how did this community industry partnership begin with Lakehead University? What was its seed, and how does it kind of grown?
well, it was about information and Wilderness North. We are a typical small business. We are not environmental experts, but we leverage the RAP program and Rob's vast knowledge on environmental issues to help us understand what was going on, so that we could get more involved and make better informed decisions. And it's just been going from there. It seems every decision, every problem we have, every time we talk to Rob, it comes up with something new, and we learn more and we move forward.
Okay. And so, I mean, I think you kind of answered my next question, but how has Lakehead University and Rob's really supported this environmental monitoring and remediation goals of the development program?
Yeah, so he's really been key for us. So he knows the property well and knows the issues well. So he's able to quickly kind of help us assess areas of concern on the property itself. We have one project specifically that we've been working on. It's a creek development on the northern half of the Porsche property, and he's been quite involved in that aspect.
And tell us a little bit more about the property and what it means for you as a...
Yeah, so again, we got involved as a neighbor. It was the old pulp and paper site that's been torn down 10 years now plus. Mm-hmm. Just a pile of concrete, absolutely no value to anyone. And we were tired of seeing the effect of that on our property and the neighbors. And so we did get involved. And
Good. So can you tell us a little about maybe some of the future partnership development? Where would you want to go? And can you see what you're doing here with Rob and his team as a bit of a model for that going forward?
Yeah. So going forward, like I said, we have the creek development project that's starting. There's also a industrial landfill site on the site, approximately a quarter of the site. So this is, again, 100 years of industrial waste that's stored in an approved facility, but still stored on the waterfront. And we are looking at the possibility of having that decommissioned and removed, and taking the risk off of the waterfront, just to improve, again, the community. It's a beautiful spot right on the lake, but it's very dangerous for people to come down and to use, and we want to improve it for everyone.
Rob, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about maybe some of the other partners that you've worked with or over the period of time?
Yeah, so in addition to Wilderness North, we work with the city on city property. So the Pool 6 property is an old grain elevator on the waterfront that's being turned into development space for an art gallery. So we're going to add some environmental features and restore some of the areas that were impacted by the grain elevator. We work with the Lakehead Region Conservation Authority on a number of sites along the waterfront, like McVicker Creek mouth and along creeks to improve riparian zone. We've been working with the Now Park site, which of course is an old industrial creosote site or sawmill site that now is more of a commercial industry, but they've got similar contaminants and legacy problems with the property that they need to address over time. And then Fort William First Nation is a big partner where they want to do restoration work around the waterfront. There's a sediment containment facility down there for contaminants that the First Nations has always had to live beside, and they want to look at how they can make that place a little more accessible and safe for their community members. So really quite a broad range of communities right down the waterfront based on these industrial properties existing.
We sometimes tend to think of everything as being in the past and not necessarily much in the future. I mean, we're talking about legacy projects. We're talking about things that happened in the past, need cleaning up, understanding the environmental. I think in 30 or 40 or 50 years in the future, do you think we'll be having the same kind of discussions, or do you think maybe your things are changing in terms of environmental monitoring and assessment?
Well, I think the environmental conditions might be similar because we haven't quite figured out how to deal with these legacy contaminants, but our comfort around them, our confidence around them, our ability to understand the risk and live with those contaminants will be better. The contaminants outside of wilderness supply may be there for the next 3 or 4 generations. How do we create systems so that those generations inherit systems of management, not systems of contaminants, so that they're confident moving forward if those can't be removed. So these are the types of futures we want, in addition to a cleaner environment. But if we can't get that done, then we want a competent society that's confident about how it's containing and managing the past.
I think this is a great example of how you were able to, as a partner with a business development thing, able to access the knowledge that's coming from this project and the university to benefit both in some sense. I mean, that of course is one of the properties of the university, is to generate research and knowledge, but also in an applied manner. Is this what you've kind of felt as one of the benefits of this?
Absolutely. I'm Thunder Bay, born and bred, and graduated from Lakehead as well. Okay. So the living community, or the living classroom, is definitely one of the big features of developing this property with remediation, with restoration, with research with that background. So we were very excited and happy that we were able to create this partnership between Lakehead and Wilderness North.
And if I could add too, Tim started out doing monitoring on the property that we're talking about. We've had many students be able to go down to that property and have a real world experience studying contaminants, and that's very rare, to have a private property owner allow us on the property and to have trust that we can benefit students while also benefiting the industry as well. So that's been a key benefit for Lakehead.
In some sense, it must really make it come alive for the students when they actually see something just down the road. These are real people, these are real projects, these are real community development.
Definitely, yeah. A real world example is what students need for sure.
Well, I wish you, wish you, Rob, Tim, and Dave the very best in our collaboration efforts and the important work that you do. So viewers, clearly lake restoration is an important process and much needed to return the ecosystem to a close approximation to its original state to maintain the lake ecosystem health. Today we heard from our Lakehead researchers and industry partners about some innovative approaches and initiatives. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Research Matters. And until next time, I'm Andrew Dean, Vice President of Research and Innovation at Lakehead University.